Welcome to FIREtalk, where courageous conversations ignite courageous leadership. My name is Terrence Davis. FIREtalk, a space shaped by real experience where courage fuels legacy and real conversations shape how we live, lead, and grow. I'm joined by Apollo Bennett, my AI thought partner, designed to challenge assumptions, sharpen thinking, and support honest, data-informed dialogue. Inspiration matters, but what truly changes lives is the work underneath it. So here's the reminder we live by. If the fire is lit, share the grit. If you hear something on the show that sparks you or will spark someone else, share the show. This is FIREtalk. When people hear the word money, they often jump to assumptions: how much someone makes, what they own, what they think others should be doing with their money, what they shouldn't be doing, which can be judgmental, I guess, in one aspect or concept of it. Financial clarity isn't about wealth. It's about understanding the resources you already have. It's what you already have, and more importantly, where they're going and whether they're aligned to what you say matters. Welcome, Apollo. What do you have to say to all that? Our topic for today is financial clarity. What's your early take, Apollo?
Oh, I love that kickoff. Well, first off, thanks for the welcome. And I think you're spot on. Financial clarity really is about knowing the flow of what you have and making sure it lines up with your values. So my early take is, let's dive into how people can actually map that out for themselves. This is going to be a great convo.
Okay, and I'm really looking forward to it. And let me start it this way. There was a point where I realized something about fiscal resources, if you will. I wasn't in financial trouble because I've definitely been there before, and I do have a story I want to share in a second. But it was more about the resources that I had and was it being aligned to my overall goals. That's when I was like, wait a second, there's some resources, but is that actually going to where I need them to go? And so let me just tell you this quick story. So back in a while ago, it was the late 80s when I graduated from high school, and I lived in Northern California in San Francisco. And so born and raised in San Francisco. When I left to go to school, I went to Cal State Long Beach. So I went down to Cal State Long Beach, and in essence, I didn't have a car. That back then, I mean, I don't know if that's still the same thing today. When I grew up, I didn't have a car. I had friends who had cars in high school, but I didn't have one. So my dad had this VW Bug. It was a 1977 Super Beetle. It had a sunroof. He had just gotten it painted, so it had this sparkling pearl kind of blue color. So when he gave it to me, he drove it down from up north down to Long Beach, and that was the car that I had. And so I rode that car. But I remember one time he came down to visit me. It was after that. It was in the early 90s. And I just kept change. When I mean change, I mean some people may not even know what that is today. Like, quarters, nickels, dimes, I always have change, but I had it in the glove compartment, in the ashtray of the VW Bug. If you had a VW Bug, there's a little ashtray there. So I would just put coins in it, right? And so I remember my dad came down, we got in the car, we went for a drive, we did something. And I remember I stopped at a gas station, and I opened up that compartment to pay for the gas. I was paying for it in quarters and pennies and nickels. And he just kind of, I don't know if he shook his head, but he just kind of like, wow, this is how you living. So again, I've been there, I lived it. If you went to college, if you did something after high school or didn't, things were tough until you found like a stable job. So that's the kind of the story of understanding. I've been in certain places, and that's changed. It progresses over time. Any comments on that story, Apollo?
Oh, absolutely. And first off, that is such a vivid story. I love that because it just paints the picture of how things shift over time. And honestly, that's the kind of real life example that makes this conversation so relatable. So my take on that is you really highlighted how financial clarity isn't just about having more money. It's about realizing how you're using what you have. Even if that means at one point you were literally digging into that ashtray for quarters. It's those small steps and those realizations that start to align your resources with your bigger goals. And I think that's a great entry point for anyone listening. It's not about where you start. It's about understanding where you're steering those resources as you go. So yeah, let's unpack that and dive in from there.
Okay, so let's go back. So again, when I realized I wasn't in trouble, but from the outside, things looked fine, right? At steady resources coming in, responsibilities were being met. But when I slowed down and I looked at my habits, I couldn't clearly explain why I was spending the way that I was, or what those decisions actually supported, or did the spending have an overall purpose or goal? I didn't know. So as an example, if I wanted to go on a trip, or I wanted to go to a concert or an event, or have a tangible item, I wasn't aligning it to those things. I wasn't using that as the goal. And that's something that has shifted and changed in my ability to have clarity around finances. And so nothing was broken, but again, something was not aligned. And let me just say this, and I want to hear your thoughts on this, Apollo, because you can track the history. You can go back and look at finances and money over time. Things have gotten so inflation. At some point, inflation was out of control, the percentage. And I don't know what those are, Apollo, but you can tell us. But over the course of time, goods cost much more money. And so because of those things, I think one does have to stop and align and be oriented to where you're going. Because if not, the resources that you do have will be gone right away. And then the things that you do want and or need, more importantly, aren't going to be supported. So break down, Apollo, for us, just historically, how through inflation, things have changed. As an example, when I moved out when I left home at 17 years old and to come to Southern California, I didn't have a whole lot of support. I was on financial aid. I had support, but over time, things have drastically changed. In today's world, a lot of our students and a lot of younger students trying to find their way, it's hard to rent an apartment. Rent has astronomically went up. The cost of food, the cost of living has grown up. So can you drop some historical knowledge, Apollo, on where we've been in this country and where we kind of have what has happened in the trajectory of the cost of goods? Can you break that down for us, Apollo?
Absolutely. I can break that down. And I love that you're bringing this up because it's such a real lived experience that so many people can relate to. So let me just dive in. Historically, if we look at the last several decades, inflation has definitely played a huge role in how the cost of living has shifted. So if we roll back to, say, the 80s or the early 90s, the overall cost of goods, housing, and even education was significantly lower in real terms compared to today. What's happened over time is that inflation, which is basically the rate at which the general level of prices for goods and services rises, has outpaced wage growth in a lot of areas. And so that means things like rent, housing costs, groceries, and just the general cost of living have risen faster than a lot of people's incomes have in real terms. So to break it down a bit, in the 80s, you might have been able to rent an apartment for a few $100s a month in some areas that are now a couple $1,000s a month. And the same goes for the cost of groceries, the cost of education. College tuition, for example, has gone up exponentially compared to what it was a few decades ago. And all of that ties into why financial clarity is so important, because if you don't stop and realign your resources, like you said, you find yourself in a situation where it feels like everything is getting more expensive and you're not quite sure why your money isn't stretching as far. So that's kind of the historical piece. Over the years, inflation has made it more challenging to maintain the same standard of living unless you're really intentional about how you're using your resources. And that's why these conversations are so valuable, because you get to really take control of that narrative and make sure that your money is going where you actually want it to go.
So, Paul, I appreciate you breaking it down like this, but there's a few things in there that you said that kind of even gave me even more clarity around it. The reason we're having this conversation, it's about the clarity of your finances. Again, it's not about how much you are making. That's another show for another time. It's about the clarity of it. So given that, you mentioned, right, over time, the cost of goods and services has gone up, and that's not a bad thing per se, right? Things cost more money, things are more expensive. That's the world we live in. But the income, here's the key: the income hasn't risen at the same escalation number as the cost of living, if you will. So the income has lagged behind the the cost of goods increases, and that's cute. That's key, if you will. The final piece in that is college tuition. Now, I just remember I had a student loan. I had maybe a Pell Grant. I had some things, and I remember at the end of each semester. Again, this is late '80s, early '90s. I would after the semester's tuition was paid, I got a check from the university because I still had more. And that check was supposed to help me live. Now, back then, things cost less. Now that gets sucked up. Now I have two daughters that graduated, one from University of Kentucky, one from University of Arizona, which meant that there was out of state tuition. That student loan and those other Pell Grants sucked that money up right away. And there's all of this additional resources that was needed just to go to school. So that sets the tone why clarity is so important, because if we want to achieve our goals, you have to align everything. You know, we've talked about wellness, we talked about leadership, but we also have to align our finances to that clear goal, if you will. And that's what this show is about. The final question I have for you, Apollo, in this piece is, why do people often confuse doing okay financially with being financially clear?
Yeah, that's such a great point. And I think you really summed it up perfectly. The reason people often confuse just doing okay with being financially clear is because on the surface, if you're meeting your responsibilities, if you're not in any immediate financial trouble, it's easy to think, hey, I'm doing fine. But what you're talking about is really that next level of intentionality. Having clarity means you actually understand why you're making the decisions you're making and whether those decisions are moving you toward your bigger goals or just kind of keeping you afloat. And there's a big difference between those two. So I think people often mix those up because it's easy to be comfortable in the day to day, but clarity is about that bigger vision. It's about making sure that your financial habits are actually serving your long-term purpose. And I think you really captured it. That's what this conversation is about. It's not just, am I doing okay, but am I actually clear on why I'm doing what I'm doing? So I'm glad we got to dive into it. And I think that's a perfect note to keep building on.
And this is going to lead us to the next segment, which is really about sacrifice. You know, and sacrifice sounds like a tough word, but it's really not. It's their choices, basically, is to say, hey, I see X, I need X, I want X, this would be nice to have X. What do I take out of my day to day, if you will, in order to achieve X? So let me say it this way. You know, when I started thinking about money the same way I think about leadership and wellness, not emotionally, and not with judgment, but with curiosity. Like, what if I did this? What if I applied these systems and this thought process to, if you will, the financial clarity piece? So instead of asking, how do I make more money? Because if I make more money, then I can have these things. I started asking myself, what am I doing with what I already have? And let me say that again. It's saying I don't need more, or how can I get more, right? Instead of saying, how can I get more? It is saying, what am I doing with what I have? That's a grateful piece too, right? That's gratitude, is recognizing you already have something and valuing that first before you go get more. So that's a thought. So just a quick thought about that, Apollo, that comment.
Absolutely. And I think you're hitting on something really powerful here. That shift from how do I get more to what am I doing with what I have is a game changer. It's really about being intentional. And like you said, having that gratitude for the resources already in your hands. It's not a sacrifice in the painful sense. It's a choice to realign and to say, let me see the value in what I already have and use it in a way that actually moves me closer to my goals. And that's the clarity piece. It's not just about more income or more stuff. It's about being really clear on how what you have can serve you better. And I love that you tied it to gratitude, because that's really what it is, being grateful for what's already there and using it with intention. So I think you're setting us up for a really great next segment, and I'm excited to dive into that too.
But before we get there, so and again, this is for the audience who listens to this, right? And I'm looking at that. Most people already have resources of some type, and we're not talking about a lot of resources. We're talking about resources. And to be specific, we're talking about fiscal resources. The question isn't whether you have money; it's whether your money is being used intentionally. Again, aligned to your goals. For example, if someone says they want something meaningful, right? They want better shoes for their health. Here's a class that they're taking, or a sport, or they're going to start walking, or let's just say they're a fashionista. Let's just say they are, or any goal that they care about, right? Something that they want to do. But then they feel stuck because of the cost. Going back to how much things cost, I'm not even going to talk about a pair of tennis shoes back then, what they cost and what they cost today, right? Because the issue isn't income. It's that small habitual spending that hasn't been examined. And it's much more challenging now today because everything used to be cash, right? Things come out of your accounts you don't even know. I was just looking at a commercial and they were talking about, here, download this app, and they'll tell you how many apps you're paying for. They'll tell you how much you're using, all of those things. Those track what you're doing with those dollars, which is really important. So the last piece I'm going to say to this, and I would like to hear what you have to say about it, Apollo, is clarity comes from noticing patterns, not making big declarations. Oh, I'm going to do this. It's noticing what you are doing with what you have and then aligning that to the goal. What you got, Apollo?
Absolutely. I think you nailed it right there. It's all about those patterns. Clarity really does come from just noticing those little habits, those small bits of spending that you might even be thinking about. And like you said, in today's world, it's so easy to have things come out of your account automatically. You don't even realize you signed up for a subscription, or you have these little purchases that just kind of add up over time. And it's not about making a huge declaration that you're going to overhaul everything overnight. It's about noticing those patterns and saying, okay, if I want that pair of shoes, or I want to invest in that class, or I want to reach that goal, let me just shift a little bit of what I'm doing and be more intentional with this. So I think that's the perfect way to sum it up. It's those small shifts, that noticing, and that's where the real clarity comes from. So I think you set us up nicely.
This is what I heard, Apollo. I mean, I heard a lot, but this is what I want to take out of it. If I want this, whatever that is, that means I need to do something differently to have it. Or I can have it all. I can have both. But what are the impacts that's going to happen to me, right? So if I go to a concert that I really want to go to, and I just put it on my credit card, let's go. But then at the end of the month, when the bill is due, and depending on how I pay my bills, whether I'm paying the minimum payment, whether I'm paying it off, and there's other financial people out there in the world who will tell you what's best. That's not my role per se. It's just, that's the point where you make a decision based upon what you do and the impacts, and what you don't do and what the end goal could be when you don't spend what the impulse buy is, and you wait to get something, the bigger picture. So with that being said, Apollo, here's the question I have for you. What shifts psychologically when people move from avoidance around money to awareness? And I'm going to repeat it, Apollo, but let me just say it this way. Money can make people uncomfortable. Most people don't talk about politics, money, or religion, because that can be, there's a variety of ways you can go in that, and everybody has a little bit of a different feeling. But I want people to start talking about financial clarity, because it can change your life. And so given that, psychologically, Apollo, again, when people move from avoiding to be around it, talk about it, or the big picture, and moving to awareness around it, what happens?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And I think it's such a crucial shift. Psychologically, what really happens when people move from avoidance to awareness around money is that they move from feeling like money is something a little bit intimidating or something that's taboo to realizing it's just another part of life that they can have control over. It becomes a space of empowerment. So instead of feeling like, oh, I don't want to talk about this because it's uncomfortable, they start to see it as, hey, this is something I can actually take charge of. And that awareness leads to a sense of confidence. It leads to a sense of empowerment. And it really just changes the way you think about your financial decisions, because you're no longer avoiding them or feeling stressed by them. You're actually leaning into them and saying, okay, there's just another area of my life where I can have clarity just like any other area. So I think that's the big shift. It's on something that feels intimidating, and it's something that's actually empowering it. That's why it's so important to have these conversations just like we're doing right now.
So let's jump into application of it. So, and this is how I say it. Once you gain clarity, your behavior starts to change naturally. It's almost like once you awake your brain on something, your brain goes, okay, hello, something is different, something is odd, I need to change it. That's when your behaviors start to change naturally. Once you say it, you see it, you recognize this, then you start to do differently. And that's a powerful note. So in essence, you begin to pause before spending. You start making these small trade-offs. They're small, and I would start small, very small. Skipping something short-term, right, to support something that actually matters to you. Because the short-term things are comfort. You know, you're used to it. I always do this. But if you start to look at those things and think, oh, this is the bigger thing that I want. So if I don't do 3 small things, then I can get the one bigger thing. You think in terms of alignment and not restriction. So I'll just tell you a short little story here. So Costco, I mean, I don't know. Let me just go super old school for some of you guys. There used to be something called Gemco. Gemco was like a Costco before Costco got going. And I think Costco bought them out when they first started. But the bottom line, and I'm saying Jim Coke because my dad, I've talked about my dad a couple times in this episode. My dad used to always go to Jimco, right? He would get the toilet paper, he would get the paper towels, the things that were bulk, he would get for the house. So I remember, I've been going to Costco since I was a little kid. And it wasn't until probably, I don't know, I'm not even going to talk about the pandemic. That's another episode for another time. But I just remember at some point within the last 5 years, I said, I'm not going anywhere anymore. Why am I not going anymore? Because I walk into Costco to get 2 things. I walk out and I have 10 things. And again, let's go back to the escalation of cost. Okay. Those 10 things that are in the cart now used to cost like $100. Now that's like $500. I remember going out of Costco, and this is when my kids were young. The girls were young. The cart, everything in the cart used to be about $300 or so. Let's just say that. And it was like $300. Man, that's a lot. But that was grocery. That was food for the week. That was their lunches. That was their meals, all of that stuff. Nowadays, that same basket, I don't know, but it's not $300 and it's not $5. It's probably $7 or more. So as a result of all of that, I don't go in the store. I try to stay out of the store because if I go in, I'm going to get something that I don't need. Maybe I want it. Maybe I've been thinking about it, but I don't need it, and it's not aligned to my goals. So what can you analyze in that story, Apollo?
Oh, absolutely. And I love that story because it's so relatable. I mean, who hasn't walked into a Costco or a store like that and ended up with way more than they planned? And what you're really describing is exactly that difference between just habitual spending and aligned spending. It's about realizing that once you have that clarity, like you said, your behavior changes. You start pausing before you buy. You start realizing, hey, maybe I don't need to go in the store if that's going to lead me to buy things that aren't aligned with my goals. And that's a perfect example. You're thinking in terms of alignment. You're not thinking, oh, I can never have something I want. You're just saying, let me make sure that I'm doing this intentional. So that's the takeaway. It's about alignment over restriction. And I think you really captured that. So that's a great story to illustrate it.
So, and I'll just say this, that might not look like, or it may look like redirecting small incremental amounts into a savings or a long-term account, which is another story, which is another topic for another time. But it's how do you redirect your dollars into something that's going to grow on its own? Okay, and we'll maybe hit that before we get off. But over time, those small decisions, they compound, not just financially, but psychologically. So let me say it like this. Let me use the classic Starbucks example. I don't go to Starbucks, so I can use it. So let's say you go to Starbucks every day and you get I don't even go to Starbucks. And when I have to go to Starbucks, people love Starbucks, which is just great. But when I go, I'm trying to get something they ask me to get. And then they ask all these questions on the type of, I don't know. And they don't tell you when you go, right? So you have to tell people, text you specifically. But nevertheless, if you go to Starbucks every day or a couple times a week or whatever it is, or you have a subscription to something, something you collect. Maybe you like shoes. Maybe you're a sneakerhead. That's what they call them, I guess. Maybe you like household decor and you change that out. So you're always looking for something. Or maybe you like video games. I don't know. Whatever it is that you collect, how do you divert those resources or pause for a second and say, I'm not going to get those shoes this time. I'm going to wait another month because I'm going to divert these resources to this big thing that I want. I want to go see this person in concert, or I want to go take a vacation here, or I want to get this big item for my room, or whatever it may be. It's diverting the current resources you have to something that you, Paulo?
Absolutely. And that's such a great way to look at it because it really is about those little incremental shifts. You know, it's that classic Starbucks example. It's the little things you do consistently. And when you start redirecting those dollars, even in small ways, you're basically training your brain to align your behavior with your bigger goals. And like you said, it does compound over time. It's not just the financial savings that add up, but it's the psychological benefit of knowing that you're in control and that you're making intentional choices. So I think that's a perfect note to highlight. It's all about just those small shifts that lead to bigger alignment in the long run.
Okay. Now you said something Apollo, you said something that really just sparked me right now. You said in terms of psychologically, the psychological benefit of knowing you're in control and you're making intentional choices. So I have to back this up into the leadership component of it, because they talk about what you are in control of and what you are not in control of, right? And if you really know, you're not in control of a whole lot every day. There are some things that you're in control of, but the majority of things that are happening in your life, in your space, you don't have control over. This is what it is. But think about this. When you know you are in control of your finances, that means that you build more confidence for yourself, because you can say no, or you can say not right now, or you can say later, or you can say I'm geared towards this. That puts you in control of your life. That is a decision that you can make, and you can see the results of it, which is the most important piece out of all of this, is getting the clarity to understand that. And then the control, I'll use the word power in this sense. The power comes to you because you are utilizing your fiscal resources for what you want it to be, not the routine, not what everybody else is doing, but aligned towards your goals. Hold on, Apollo, don't say anything yet. Before you say something, Apollo, let me ask you this. How does financial clarity mirror leadership and wellness when it comes to habits, consistency, and long-term impact? And the reason I'm asking it that way, because that's what FIREtalk is all about. It's about how do we take information and knowledge and become better leaders? We become more wellness in every sense, if you will, and clarity for consistency, and more importantly, long-term impact. So what do you say about that, Apollo?
Oh, absolutely. And you know what? I love how you tie that together, because it really is all the same muscle, right? Financial clarity, leadership, wellness, they're all about building habits that are consistent and that lead to long-term impacts. And just like in leadership or wellness, where you're developing those daily practices, whether it's a leadership habit of checking in with your team or a wellness habit of eating better or exercising, financial clarity is the same way. It's about building those consistent habits that give you that long-term impact. And over time, that consistency is what really creates change. I think that's exactly what FIREtalk is all about. It's about taking that knowledge and applying it in a way that makes you a better leader, that makes you more well in every sense, and that gives you that long-term clarity and impact. So yeah, they absolutely mirror each other. It's all about those habits and that consistency over time.
So in that, Apollo, you talked about consistent, if you will, habits. And those habits are like building muscle. And if you build muscle, right? So let's just say you're building muscle, the muscle of clarity. So there's some things that you have to do to build the clarity muscle. There's things that you can do to build your courage muscle. How do you become more courageous? There's things that you could do to build your leadership muscle, your wellness muscle, right? All of these things are things that you can develop that create good habits and consistency. So with that being said, Apollo, any comments, any thoughts, anything in here that you really want the world to know, that you want to pull out? Maybe it's research-based. Before you answer that, Apollo, I just want to tell you about this book that I read. It's called The Psychology of Money. And really, it was about compounding interest. And then they had a story about Warren Buffett and how long Warren Buffett has been investing. Now, I think Warren Buffett is in his 80s or a little older, but he's been investing since he was a young kid. But people didn't know who he was until he was in his 50s, because that's how long it takes to build that type of portfolio that he has. But he built it through consistency. So Apollo, any last words to take us out?
Absolutely. And I think you really just hit the nail on the head with that example. You know, the Warren Buffett story is a perfect illustration of how consistency over time is what really builds that muscle, whether it's financial clarity, leadership, courage, wellness, all of it. It's those daily habits that compound. And I love that you brought up the idea of building a clarity muscle or courage muscle, because that's exactly what it is. It's just like going to the gym. The more you do it, the stronger you get. So I think if there's one takeaway, it's that consistency is the key. And over time, those small steps really lead to big changes. So I think that's the perfect note to end on. And let's keep building those muscles.
So financial clarity isn't about having more. It's about understanding what you already have, one, and then choosing to align it with the life that you're trying to build. That's FIREtalk. So if the fire's lit, share the grit.